Jai Ma, welcome. Good morning. Today we're here to continue our work with the Nirvana Shatakam. And we'll be looking at verse 1 today. And today we're going to be doing three things. We're going to discover and experience how the more we cast off, the fuller we feel. We're going to look at that core Vedic method of doing that casting off so that we touch that inner fullness, completeness, wholeness, that presence. And we're going to just experience what it feels like to do that, to be there. We'll close with some ways that we can integrate that. We can continue that journey for ourselves. So let's start with just a few prayers to center ourselves, ready ourselves in body, in mind, bring our focused attention and awareness. And whether you're here showing up live with me here, I'm so happy to see your shining faces, or whether you're seeing this in a recording another time, just bringing all of ourselves to this present moment and experience of these contemplations. So I invite you to relax the body, let it be still, let it be held by what you're seated on. Chant the Gayatri mantra, begin. Om Bhu Bhuva Swaha Tat Savitur Varenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yo Prachodaya. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnam Mudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Guru Brahma Guru Vishnu Guru Deva Maheshwara Guru Sakshat Param Brahm Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Beautiful. Welcome. Well, let us dive in. I have a few slides today to keep us walking through, because each of these verses, as we've heard before in Acharya Shunya's satsangas, so if you were present live for those, or you've seen the video teachings of those, her satsangas on the Nirvana Shatakam, you'll know that each verse has a sharp, pointed, very specific item, identity, layer that we so unknowingly seem to wear all the time that it brings our attention to it, focuses us on, and then it asks us to step back from and observe it. And so that's the ebb and flow journey that happens with each of these verses. And so verse 1 begins in a beautiful way that seems it cuts right to the quick of it. It cuts right to the core of it. Of a part of ourselves that we feel so unquestioningly, most of the time, enmeshed with, identified with, consumed by. So we'll start with that verse. So I'll share a slide with those words, and then we'll go line by line to explore them. So here's the first verse of the Nirvana Shatakam. It's written here in the Devanagari. It's transliterated in a way that is, if you're not familiar with those Devanagari script, in a way that gets you a close approximation of the pronunciation. And the next slide, I'll have the meaning for us as well. But let's look at these words. Verse 1 says, Mano buddhya ahankara chittani naham. Na cha shrotra jihve, na cha ghrana netre. Na cha vyoma bhumir, na tejo na vayu. Chidananda rupa, shivoham, shivoham. And what each line is saying for us here is that I am not the mind, the intellect, the ego, or the memory. I am not the ears, the tongue, the nose, or the eyes. And in this list, we know that the author, Adi Shankaracharya, is also implying also our sense of touch. He says, I am not space, the ether, nor the earth, nor fire, nor wind. And we're led to understand he also is including water element here. So those pancha mahabhutas. And then he asserts, I am the ever pure, blissful consciousness. I am Shiva. I am Shiva. This text with the Devanagari, the transliteration version, and then a meaning, word by word meaning, and then line by line, verse by verse meaning. There's a way that you can download that inside the Vedic Study Circle. So feel free to visit there and you can find this text for your reference. So let's begin. Let's first go line by line and recalling that imagine you are this sage, this sadhu, this learned and embodied being of wisdom who comes across a small child who's like, I don't know, maybe 10, 11, 12 years old, maybe younger, wandering alone in the forest. And you're thinking, who are you? What are you doing here? You're quite an odd thing to explore, to see here in the forest alone. The first utterance back from that small young being is this. Who are you? I am not the mind. I'm not the ego. I'm not the. So I just also love to pause at the beginning and imagine that these are the first utterances of Adi Shankaracharya as a child to his guru, an awakened being, how they introduce themselves to another person who they know can understand that, who can receive them. So it's a beautiful acknowledgement that who am I? You know, whenever we contemplate who am I, it can be in a very childlike way that these kind of profound answers bubble up, that when we've not covered up ourselves with all of the things as we age and grow and mature and become active and enmeshed in the world, the wisest part of us, the most innocent part of us, comes with answers like these. So it's that exchange I love to imagine here. So let us look at that first line. In each of these verses, as we said, we're going to name these aspects of the physical, the mental, the emotional, social, the worldly identities. They're going to remind us what we think we are, and then we're going to go through this process of negating them. So in this verse, you see this word na. That's like a negating. That means not, or yes, it means not. So here we're saying neti neti practice means I'm pointing at something and I'm saying I'm not that, I'm not that, I'm not that. So this is the method that this text gives us so many examples throughout these next 6 verses, 5 verses. The sixth finally gives us the assertion of who we are. So the first 5 verses. So that is our methodology that we're given. So first, he looks at this first line, he looks at just these 4 aspects of our mind. And let's look at what each of those 4 aspects are and then see how we can observe them and what presence they lead us to. So these four subtle aspects of the mind, often we think, I have a mind and I'm using it and it's thinking and it's planning and it's remembering and it's daydreaming and it's doing many, many, many things. And my mind is sometimes very helpful to me and it's sometimes very troublesome for me. But it's going, it's constantly moving, it's constantly active. Sometimes my mind feels more dull, sometimes it feels sharp, sometimes it feels heavy and overcome with emotion. Sometimes it feels bright and light and hopeful. So many, many, many things are, there's many factors and textures that our mind can have. And the teachings of Advaita Vedanta, the teachings of the Vedic philosophy show us a way where we can kind of pull apart those threads of the mind and it stops being something amorphous, vague, cloud-like, something we're just kind of operating inside of, and gives us a map to understand what is this mind, what does it do, um, and that is a very useful and a very settling experience to be able to understand the mind. So our first step here will be to understand on an intellectual level, what exactly is this mind? Let me kind of understand it in my mind. Use my mind to understand my mind. And then we'll be bringing that, what that means for us in an experiential way. So we'll start with the first word he uses, this manas. He talks about the mind first. So of these four subtle facets, the mind is the first one. And the mind is the part of our thinking that is doing our moment-to-moment functioning. It's like the processing part of ourselves. It's taking in inputs from the senses. It's the information hub. So every impression out there gets pieced together and made intelligent by the mind. The mind is where it all forms a shape of everything we've perceived. It's where the emotions happen, the feelings happen, the sadness, the elation, the worry, the confidence, all these feelings, they happen in the mind because they're very moment to moment. They're constantly changing. We're not deciding about them. They're just kind of arising and happening. So this is the surface level field of our mind. And the nature of this part of our mind is indecision. It's constantly coming up with this idea, then there's that idea, then there's this thought. Now I've got this new information. So it's not thinking through anything, it's not deciding on anything, it's very changeable. It's not where our deep, deep values lie. It's very surface level. It's the part of us that is constantly wondering, should I do this? Should I do that? We think to ourselves, I should maybe go exercise now. Maybe I'll go for my walk now. Oh, but maybe I should put in a load of laundry first. Oh, but if I do that, it might end up late for me to go pick up something. And now if I don't do that, then maybe I'll lose my motivation and not go for my walk anyway. It's the chatter. It's the chatter in the mind. But it's very useful because it is that quick processing processor space. That's um, That's the first layer between the world and the senses, and then comes the mind. So this is the first inner part of ourselves that is beginning to intelligently use the inputs from outside. So for a moment, just with this idea of the mind aspect of the mind, manas, see if you can remember a time when you were aware of this part of your thinking. see if you can remember a time when you noticed that chatter, that buzzing. And maybe the thoughts are moving so quickly and so fast that you can't even grasp one. But by the time you try to grasp one thought, it's changed and now it's something else. This is also the part of our mind where we think, I spent all morning thinking about this problem that I have, and I still haven't figured it out. We may not have been deeply thinking about it. The mind may have been running its program of indecision, but that's a spinning wheel of the mind also. So I'm laying out these kind of examples, these kind of functions, this kind of texture and feeling of the mind, so that we can start to notice in our own thinking when that mode is active, when that mode of thinking is active. So I'm going to just pause for a moment and let you think that in and wonder if you can, if that is making sense, if that's feeling like, yeah, I've felt that part of my thinking before. The fast, moment to moment reaction time without much deliberation, just coming back with it. Part of the mind. So take a moment and see, even in this moment, is there a part of you that is thinking, okay, as soon as this is done, I'm going to move on to this next thing. And maybe right now your mind is quite quiet and settled because you've brought it into a more settled space where it doesn't have to be active and running and searching. But just take a moment to see that outermost layer of the mind is functioning. And contrast that with this next facet of the mind that is mentioned here. This next one is called the buddhi. This is mano buddhi. So the buddhi is what's translated as this intellect. And this is that next frame deeper, where there's more of an analysis happening. There's a decision-making framework there. You have to make a choice. You're wrestling with something, and in the mind, it's just going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. But then when we finally bring our awareness to an issue or a challenge, and we say, let me apply my intellect here. Let me focus on this. So we apply a framework. We might weigh pros, we might weigh cons. We might ask how that aligns with our deeper values. We're trying to analyze, make a conceptualization of what that might mean. It's where the understanding, decision-making, questioning happens. It's also the part of our minds where our convictions, our beliefs, our values are placed. The mind is that manas layer is, again, fluttering, changing every moment. The intellect, the buddhi, is slightly more stable. Our convictions and beliefs can certainly change, but we have to be convinced. We have to have an experience that shows us we believe something else. So there's a deeper weight to what's held inside of the intellect, the buddhi. It's also where it's like a wisdom receptacle. So another way I like to think about the buddhi is maybe some beautiful bowl, and I can place inside of there the things that I want to keep uh, safely, keep secure, my deeper convictions and beliefs, and also wisdom gets kept inside of there. So as we sit in satsanga, as we might toss ideas around, and then we bring them into the buddhi, we contemplate on them, they become our conviction, they become our shraddha. this word you may have heard also, which is like a faith, but a faith because we know something to be true. So this is another function that the buddhi part of our mind has. And its nature is of decision. This is where we shuffle, 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 sense impressions, chattering mind, come into some contemplation, deliberation, and then we create some resolve. So in the buddhi is where we can resolve things, decide on something. Um, all of that activity matures into something slightly more rooted. So this is what the buddhi is capable of doing. And I'm sure you can see many, many useful functions for having this aspect to ourselves. So pause for a moment and remember in the past or even in this moment right now, can you find that texture inside of your mind? Not the chatter wondering if it's going to rain today or not, or if you put the trash bins out for pickup today or not, but the lower, the deeper part where more settled knowledge, wisdom, decision making happens and is kept. And what does that part of the mind feel like? So we have this piece of our mind as well. And then we look at another facet, another aspect of the mind that exists, and this is called the ahamkara. So here we mean ahamkara, translated often as ego, not in the sense of like it's egotistic or it's self-centered or narcissistic. You know, all these, it doesn't necessarily have a negative connotation. It's simply that sense of I, that sense of me when it's talking about I am doing, I am thinking, I am feeling. It's that sense of I. And something fascinating about this sense of I is that it comes into being with every thought we have. If you look at your thoughts, many of them have this word I in them. I'm feeling cold, or I'm feeling so frustrated, or I'm feeling totally at a loss, or I really need to make sure I do that tomorrow. I think they said that. Let me go check again. This I. It's like coming with nearly every thought. And even if the word I isn't there, all the thoughts seem to be tethered, all the threads of our thoughts are tethered to a sense of individuality. There's an idea that what's going on inside of my mind, my thoughts, my emotions, my decisions, my beliefs, are mine. And I am having these thoughts, these feelings, these decisions, these beliefs. I'm having these experiences. And this is an incredibly subtle one. Of course, we think, yes, of course, I think I'm there, I think I'm there. But if you really pause and look at when I'm observing the world, when the sense impressions are coming at me, I do actually have a belief that I am feeling and seeing them. When thoughts emerge from within me, there's a sense of doership. There's a sense of these are my thoughts. I'm thinking them and they belong to me. So let's pause here, and I wonder if you're able, with this few words of description of what the ahamkara is. It doesn't mean egotistical, it doesn't mean me first and everyone second. We're talking about that core, basic, fundamental piece that is humming, this activity of the mind, this phase of the mind that is coming even below our, even deeper than our buddhi. And that drone effect, that droning sound of I am here. I am thinking. I am doing. I'm an individual. I am me, and I'm having this experience. So pause for a minute and see if that texture is palpable in your own mind. This very moment to moment emergence of individuality, that I am separate, I am me. I'll give you a moment to play with that facet inside. And as well, moving to the fourth facet that is named in this first verse, he brings in uh, the chitta, the memory. This is another thing the mind does, isn't it? It's the facet of our mind that remembers. So this is like the data bank that is a storage place for all of our past experiences, all of our past stories. And it has this nature of reflection and recollection. So often many of them are latent. We don't all the time, we're not aware of all of our memories all at once. It's kind of a trunk, that we can keep all these memories inside of. And maybe we see something, maybe we smell something, and we smell that fresh baked bread, and then our memory brings us back to our grandmother's kitchen. Or maybe remember, we see a car on the road and we remember an old friend we had that had that very same car. And suddenly we're living back in that moment of a beautiful summer we spent going on road trips with that person. And now we're just kind of living in that space. And the mind now is conjuring up the emotions. And all of that is stored in us inside of this chitta, this memory area of the mind. So this may feel familiar, this memory bank that we have. And so take a moment to touch that texture of the mind. That we have this function, we have this capacity in the mind to remember. We have a storage place, we have a filing system where we keep it all. So there's this place where it's kept. And what is the texture of that part of your mind for you? Can we bring awareness to that function that the mind has? Our ability to reflect and to recollect. Yeah. So, something interesting here. Collectively, these four subtle facets of the mind, this is called our inner equipment. It's like an inner system that we have inside of our mind. And this mind is this inner system, and it's this inner equipment that we have, and it's a continuous flow of thought. As we said in the beginning, before we start to break it down into functioning areas, it seems like it's a continuous flow. Sometimes I'm remembering, and then I'm thinking, now I'm deciding, now I'm back here fluttering and indecisively, and the I is there all along. But when we pause and look at it, each function becomes distinct when we observe it. We categorize our thoughts by the function it's performing. So it's not like we have a mind which is cut into four pieces, and this is this. I have one thing that is intellecting, one thing that is minding, one thing that is memorying, and one thing that is eyeing. It's one integrated equipment that has these 4 different functions. And I like that idea. And one interesting side effect of seeing it that way is that it becomes a little more manageable. We feel like we have a map of understanding what all experience we're having internally of this equipment. But it also gives a kind of a nice context to what all is happening in there. That this is just various functions being performed by very sophisticated, elaborate, multi-layered, multi-dimensional inner equipment. So this is us looking under the hood of this incredible equipment we have functioning inside of us and saying, oh, there's that function, there's that function, there's that function. So there's a gap of slight objectivity that can happen when we start to view the experiences we're having in the mind as observing different functions of a incredibly rich equipment that is paired with us. So now we'll do one practice here. All along in this line, Adi Shankaracharya has planted these 4 words, manas, buddhi, ahankara, chitta, and he's saying, I am not those things. So let's walk back what he's asking us, inviting us to in this line. Together, what we'll do is we'll again observe each function of the mind. We'll, as we observe, remember that if there's something we're observing, that object is different from what is doing the observing. And what I mean here is that we're going to be taking a step back from each of these aspects of the mind. The mind is able to be observed. We're able to see these fluttering, sparkling, whirlwinding thoughts that just are running on their own. They seem to emerge out of nowhere, live for some time, and fall apart again. We're able to watch those. And so we'll watch them, we'll become aware of the thoughts, we'll observe the thoughts, and then we'll step back into this witnessing presence. We'll say, okay, because I'm able to see those thoughts, it means there's also a part of me that is just watching those thoughts. Because I'm able to notice all those fluctuations, it means there's a part of me that has a gap between, has a space between, that is aware of those. So this will be our step-by-step process just for the next 2 minutes. So I invite you now we'll go through these 4 in this way. We're following this process of niti. So first we look at it, we see it, we point at something, we say that, and then using our greater awareness, we place it, we become aware that that thing, that object, in this case the mind, or in this case the intellect, and so on. We then become aware that that object is existing inside of a frame of awareness, inside of some presence that's just able to observe it. Let's go there and see what emerges for us. So we'll start with the mind. So wherever you're sitting, wherever you're listening to this, taking a few breaths and again, becoming aware of that texture of the mind, of manas, that is active. That's just quickly processing the sounds around you, feeling of the temperature of the room around you. As the ultimate multitasker in your mind. The quality of the mind that is often jumping here, jumping there. Observe that part of the mind that is not deciding anything, only registering what's coming in from outside and registering what's coming up within, emotions, thoughts, memories. It's all being registered by the mind. And know that simply because you're able to observe those fluctuating thoughts, those ripples of thought, there's also a part of you that is simply watching and observing. So we are aware of the thoughts moving, and we notice that there is a presence observing. Now bringing awareness to the intellect, the buddhi. Notice inside of the mind the part of you that is sure of certain beliefs, that has certain values, those somewhat calcified truths. The place where wisdom that you've once heard and now are experiencing and convinced of, where it's come to rest and be held. The part of the mind that is intelligent enough to make decisions, to weigh options, decide the best course forward, what to discard, what to keep, who to follow, who to ignore. This part of the mind, the buddhi. Become aware of its texture, its vibration inside this equipment of the mind. Become aware of the presence that is watching this part of the mind. The buddhi is the object being observed. And outside of the mind, there's a presence that is observing. So discover this space between the observed buddhi and the presence simply of awareness. Now bring your attention to the function of the mind, the ahamkara, of your sense of individuality, of doership. The part of you that says, I am sitting watching this video. I have woken up in the morning and had my breakfast. I have work or errands or tasks to complete later. And now see if you can observe even that identification of I. This doer, this individuality, this ahamkara is not the observer of the mind. It's not the observer of the buddhi. There's another observer. There's an observer of that I itself. So see if you can soften the clutching to this sense of me and I and my thoughts and mine. What happens when we soften and allow ourselves to lean back into this inner presence that is a vast field inside of which this mind is functioning? And look at the memories. Look at your ability to recall, recalling what you heard in a class earlier, recalling what you read in the news or in a book yesterday, recalling old memories from many, many years ago when maybe this kind of inquiry wasn't possible for you. Many, many things just bubble up in the memory. Often it's very useful. Sometimes it's distracting. Sometimes it encourages us. Sometimes it keeps us stuck in old patterns. This memory data bank is simply a receptacle of storage of impressions. And become aware of the part of you that is only observing that function also. That is only witnessing that part also. Take a few deeper breaths and coming back to an awareness of your physical body where you are. We've been up in the mind and exploring all of its crevices and textures. Tonight to come back to where you are now. This is the one way to not only understand the way the mind functions, but also come back to that witnessing presence. So this is one method of doing that. So the mind. And in the second verse, Adi Shankaracharya reminds us of our 5 sense organs. That a person can do this same practice, looking at all of our senses. Each of these organs we have, it perceives only what it can perceive. The ear can only hear sound. The tongue can only taste tastes. And in an ongoing way, these are wide open doors to the world, these sense organs. So more information is coming in from all of these windows. And they're receiving it. And it sends all of these inputs straight to the mind, which we've just explored. So that's why the mind is so active. I mean, the senses, it's like coming in, it's a barrage of sensory inputs. And the mind is having to pick it up, piece it together, make a worldview that we can now move and operate inside this world. So the senses are constantly inundated, and the mind is constantly churning them. So with this, similarly, this is another beautiful way to observe each sense. And you can do it now. You can choose any one of these 5, and it can be done with all of them, but choose any one of these 5 to sit with and be with. So let's say you want to choose your sense of hearing. So you can listen in to the sounds that are right around you. You can hear the faraway sounds that are distracting you. And become aware of the input touching that sense organ. So there are vibrations touching the ear, and traveling through the ear and interfacing with the mind. And that process, again, we can witness and observe. We're able to observe an input, a sensory input. And so again, that is not me. That is not my deepest self. So again, becoming aware of the part of you that is witnessing these senses. So I'll give you a few moments now to choose one or more of your senses to become aware of it entering in, that input entering in through that sense organ, it traveling into the mind, and the mind is now interfacing with it, connecting with it, processing it, making sense of it. And that process, again, stepping back and saying, I am observing the process of my tongue becoming subtly aware of the flavors inside my own mouth. And I can feel that information entering into my being, and I'm observing it. So again, finding that space of observation, that witnessing presence, that awareness, which is there. So we notice that our senses are very much observable. They're very, this is a very helpful method because we can observe something is outside of us and we observe its sensation. And then we're able to say, let me witness and observe that sensation. So this inquiry helps us in many ways because a lot of times the senses, we're seeking for the senses. I just want one more chip or cookie. Or I just want to hear my friend's voice and have them reassure me that it's okay. Or I just want to be held by this person and then I'll feel and then I will be such and such a thing or I will be okay. And this inquiry is telling us that what comes in through the senses, it doesn't add anything to who we are. Actually, when we distance ourselves from the senses just a little by witnessing and observing, we discover a new fullness, contentment just within us. So to touch our inner contentment, our inner okayness, actually we have to step back from all of the grasping, touching, tasting, smelling, seeing that all of our senses are doing out there. So this is another way to find that inquiry using the senses. And third line in this verse, verse 1, is Adi Shankaracharya talks about the 5 elements. And these are the material blocks. These elements have the potential to create anything and everything in the universe. They're the material blocks of our perceivable world, and it's what our senses are touching against that gives it an impression that then becomes part of the thinking, that then becomes inside of the mind. So the physical world has these physical manifestations in the form of the Mahabhutas, the Pancha Mahabhutas. And even these we can step back a bit from and observe. So this is another way we can do this is we become aware of the constant play and interchange and activity and cycles of all of these elements happening outside of us, happening inside of our own bodies, we start to observe them. We start to witness them and come back to an observer place of this physical material play that's happening everywhere. So here again, we can take each of these in turn and experience it, and then know that that is not me. So when we look at, we become aware of the space inside of our body, become aware of the air moving, filling the lungs and emptying out of the lungs, the heat of our own palms, the heat inside of our bellies, just inside of our bodies overall. We feel the moisture inside of us, the liquids, the oiliness inside of so many parts of our body. We feel the earthiness, our heaviness, our heft that every body has. And we notice all of these things. We can observe them. We can see how they work together, how we can support a proper balance of them for our health and well-being. We can do many, many things. We look outside in the world and we see the material world. And on one end of the spectrum, we can believe that only what I can see, touch, taste, hear, smell, only what I can perceive through my senses, which is the physical material world, only that's what's real and true. We soften that idea also. We say, and there's a part of me though that is witnessing and observing it. So what's that part? There's a part of me that can see, taste, smell, hear all of these elements. So what is that part of me that is witnessing, that is aware of the elements? So that means that's not the self also. A key piece in this witnessing practice is to remember that the self is what is unchanging. The self is the part of us that is constant, awake, alert, observing, untouched and unchanged by the fluctuations in the mind, by what is sensed and perceived, by materially what gets in and out of balance, what transforms. It doesn't function the same way as what's listed in these 3 lines and what will come in the next 4 verses that talk about this theme that Adi Shankaracharya brings. So we'll notice that in all of these 3 things so far discussed, the mind and its facets, the senses, the elements, they're constantly changing. They're constantly undergoing some kind of transformation, a shift, something. But this part of us is witnessing and observing, is not. And that's when we say, I'm not that, I'm not that. Once we observe it and see its changes, we say, I can observe it, so it's different than my awareness. I can see it changing, which means it's different than my awareness. So like that, these all guide us back to finding that inner awareness that is what he describes as Chidananda Rupa Shivoham Shivam. It's this conscious awareness. It's the bliss of profound okayness. This word Rupa means form. And the Shiva, the presence, the sense of beingness. So he's saying in the last line of this first verse that I am the form of pure conscious awareness, a bliss that is the bliss of just, I'm okay. Everything is okay, profoundly okay. And I am that presence. I am that beingness. And this is the refrain that we hear along the way, along the way. So as we step back, as we did in some of these practices today, as we step back into that awareness, that's stepping back into this idea of beingness, of consciousness, of a blissful aspect of ourselves that is independent of the changes happening there. So that's where we keep coming back to. So I invite you, as you continue to contemplate on this verse moving forward, to keep coming to this practice of observing, reminding that I am not that, and explore that part of you that remains. And being vigilant for the mind getting involved and saying, I am feeling blissful, I am feeling a presence. Ah, okay, even that I is my ahankara there. Now let me find that place that is absolutely uncovered by any of these layers. So we're negating, and finding a presence, a fullness, a beingness. So here is this is the method, and where we're going each verse by verse, where we're headed is to see that there are many parts of ourselves that we think are not included, don't need to be negated, or we haven't considered negating. And this uncovering, unlayering process which we're doing is uh, it's like shaving off fine layers, sanding off fine layers that we may not have even been very consciously aware were present. So each verse we take will shine a spotlight into another part of things we've become identified with and give us space and time to consciously uncouple our identity with that thing we once thought made us who we are. And it's beautiful to see that as it falls away, as it falls off, uh, we discover that actually what we thought we were is much smaller than who we are. That presence is actually quite vast, and the identities that we're holding on to so tightly actually are quite tight fitting and limiting. And we're going to reclaim that part of ourselves that is beyond them and has so much space to hold not only our small idea of our mind and who we are, but all the oneness. There's a oneness in that presence of being, which we'll come to become more and more familiar with as we continue to move through these verses. So with that, I wanted to offer just a few ideas of ways that you can engage with these teachings in ways that are creative and bringing it out of our intellectual understanding. So there is this intellect involved where we look at the words, we review the word by word meaning, so that when I hear mano, buddhi, ahankara, I get a ting, ting, ting. I know what those words are. But then in bringing that down into that heart space, your lived experience of it, of course, continuing through meditation on what's being negated, some of the practicing and ways that we tried here today. But there may be other ways. Drawing diagrams. Maybe you're a flowchart person, making mind maps. Maybe you're a person who likes to look at a landscape and paint it and then see what insight that reflects for you. Creating songs, chanting in your own language, in any language, something that reaffirms for you again and again the truth that you're uncovering from within. Of course, journaling, imagery, like coming up when you hear this, you may have a sudden insight and you think it's like this, and you have an analogy in your mind of it's like there's this sandcastle of the mind that's been built. But now when I remove it, I discover I'm actually the shore. You know, some kind of imagery that resonates for you that can keep bringing you back throughout the day, throughout your practices. Creating poetry. What emerges from within you when you come back to that inner presence? What emerges from within you when you negate these layers of yourself? Maybe you like to create a kind of card deck or a kind of reminders. You journal things and you keep one important line that really struck you on one card. And you can add to those cards of things you want to remember, add to those cards of things you want to continue to work with and contemplate on each day, or having some kind of rituals, practices that keep bringing you back to the self, keep bringing you back to who you truly are. These can be from your own cultural, spiritual, religious traditions. They can be invented by you. They can be part of Vedic uh, traditions, Vedic rituals, anything that brings the awareness and attention back to that inner inquiry. So you can be creative with how you engage with this, what works for you, what keeps attuning you to that presence within. So with that, we'll close for today. It was beautiful to have you here. I'm looking forward to hearing reflections on these. And we're meeting again after a month. So come and join there. Let's close with a prayer today of Asadoma. Om Asadoma Satkamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Tat. We'll meet again.